You can spot it from a mile away. A person starts talking, and what begins as a normal conversation slowly spirals into a stream of words that just doesn't end. Their sentences overlap, explanations multiply, laughter appears in the wrong places. They keep adding details no one asked for, circling around the same point as if they're afraid to land. You can see their eyes flicker for approval after every sentence. A silent question hiding behind the noise. Am I doing okay? Are you still with me? It starts innocently. Maybe they're introducing themselves at a party, or explaining something at work, or talking to someone they quietly want to impress. But once that nervous current hits, you can almost feel their brain speeding up, like a car rolling downhill without brakes. Each silence feels heavier than the last. Each pause feels like a test they're terrified to fail. So they keep talking. Not because they have more to say, but because stopping feels dangerous. There's a kind of rhythm to it. Words spilling out just fast enough to sound rehearsed, but disjointed enough to feel anxious. They interrupt themselves, laugh too soon, say anyway 3 times before finding a way out. The voice gets slightly higher, the gestures a little sharper. Their stories stretch longer than they should, not because they're boring, but because they can't quite find a clean exit. It's like watching someone wrestle invisible static. The quiet hum of self-doubt vibrating beneath every word. Sometimes it looks like enthusiasm. To an untrained eye, they seem lively, expressive, full of stories. But if you listen closely, you'll notice the difference. Genuine excitement has warmth. This kind of talk has a nervous edge. It's speech powered by adrenaline, not joy. It's not about connecting. It's about surviving the moment. They don't pause to breathe because breathing means silence. And silence is unbearable. Silence gives their thoughts a second to turn on them. Silence means noticing the heartbeat in their ears, the heat in their face, the 1,000 little what-ifs waiting to pounce. So they outrun it. They outrun their own anxiety with words, as if the sound itself could keep the fear from catching up. And it's not just strangers or social events. This happens everywhere. At the cash register, on a date, in meetings, even with close friends. You'll see them explaining things twice, apologizing mid-sentence, overthanking someone for holding the door. They try to fill the space with politeness, humor, information. Anything that feels safer than stillness. And the funny thing is, they often know exactly what they're doing. You can see that flicker of self-awareness, the micro-grimace after a joke that didn't land, the half-smile that says, "Oh God, I'm doing it again." But in that moment, stopping feels impossible. Later, when they're alone, it hits them like a replay they didn't ask for. Every sentence, every tangent, every unnecessary detail. They think, why couldn't I just shut up? They feel embarrassed, exposed, like they accidentally left a light on inside their head and everyone saw the mess. But the truth is, that overflow wasn't arrogance. It was defense. It was the nervous system doing its clumsy best to stay afloat. People who talk too much when they're nervous aren't trying to steal the spotlight. They're just trying to keep the room from going dark. Words become their safety net. Their noise is their way of saying, please don't misread my silence. And that's the paradox. The more they try to sound at ease, the more their anxiety starts to show through the cracks. What you're hearing isn't confidence. It's the sound of someone trying not to drown in their own awareness. It's not attention-seeking. It's not arrogance. It's the quiet panic of someone who can't quite trust silence, because silence to them has never felt safe. From the outside, the picture looks simple. Most people watching a nervous talker think they've already figured them out. They just love attention. They never shut up. They're that kind of person. It's almost comforting how easily we label what we don't understand. Because the truth, the real messy truth, takes a bit more patience to see. When someone can't stop talking, our instinct is to judge their personality, not their state. We assume it's a fixed trait, not a response. Loud equals confident. Fast equals energetic. Non-stop chatter equals ego. And that little shortcut saves us the effort of actually listening. It's easier to roll our eyes than to realize what's really happening underneath. In group settings, these people are often cast into roles without even knowing it. The talker, the attention seeker, the try hard. Colleagues learn to tune them out after a few meetings. Friends smile politely and let them fill the air. Partners grow quiet, waiting for a pause that never comes. And little by little, the talker becomes a caricature in everyone's head. The person who can't take a hint. But what no one notices is that they're painfully aware of that image. They feel the shift in people's eyes. They catch the subtle sigh, the impatient glance at a phone, the quick, that means please wrap it up. They register it all. And that awareness makes them talk even more. Because now the silence feels contaminated. Proof that they've failed the social test. It's easy to assume they love being the center of attention, but that's rarely true. If anything, they're terrified of what happens after the spotlight turns off. The overtalking isn't about hogging space, it's about managing tension. It's the conversational version of pacing in a room. Movement that keeps anxiety from sinking its claws in. Think about it. When someone rambles, they're not actually steering the conversation. They're trying to outrun their own thoughts. The flood of words is an unconscious way of buying time. Buying safety. Every extra sentence is another second where judgment is postponed. And yet, from the outside, it reads as self-centeredness. We mistake panic for performance. We confuse anxiety for arrogance. We see a person sweating to hold the room together and assume they're desperate for applause. Sometimes people will even mock them kindly. "You always talk so much." And the talker laughs along, pretending it's true. They join the joke, because correcting it would mean revealing what's really going on. It's easier to be the clown than the anxious one. Easier to let people think you're loud than to admit you're scared of being unseen. The irony is that most nervous talkers don't actually want to talk. They want relief. They want to exhale. They want someone else to carry the silence for a moment so they can rest inside it. But when nobody knows that's what's happening, they just look exhausting. So the cycle continues. People misread their overtalking as neediness, and that misunderstanding becomes another quiet shame they carry home. They think, "I'm too much. People get tired of me. I ruin conversations." And that shame fuels the very behavior people judge them for. Next time, they'll try harder to sound casual, to stay liked, to keep the flow going, which of course means more talking. From the outside, it looks like noise. From the inside, it feels like survival. Psychologists have a simple explanation for what looks like too much talking. It's not a personality flaw. It's a regulation strategy. In other words, it's what the brain does when it feels unsafe but can't leave the room. When you're nervous, your body lights up with the same biological reaction designed for survival. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense, adrenaline kicks in. It's the fight or flight system. But in social situations, you can't fight, and you can't exactly run. So the brain finds a third option: talk. Speech becomes movement. Words become a socially acceptable way to flee without leaving. There's a concept in emotion regulation theory from James Gross, 1998, that explains this perfectly. When emotions feel too intense to sit with, people instinctively shift attention away from them. For some, that means zoning out. For others, it means controlling the external world. And for nervous talkers, it means controlling the conversation, filling it, steering it, covering every crack in the silence so anxiety has nowhere to echo back. The more anxious they feel, the faster they speak. The faster they speak, the less they can actually feel. It's like flooring the gas pedal so you don't hear the engine knocking underneath. Another layer is what psychologists call the fear of negative evaluation, one of the core features of social anxiety. It's that quiet dread of being judged, misunderstood, or silently rejected. So instead of giving others the chance to form an opinion, the anxious brain tries to manage their perception by talking, explaining, apologizing, softening, charming, deflecting. It's not conversation anymore. It's defense choreography. Then there's cognitive load, the way our brains handle too many simultaneous demands. When you're anxious, working memory shrinks. You can't hold thoughts steady. Pausing to think feels like stalling, like failure. So you fill the gap with sound, hoping the next sentence arrives before your brain completely blanks. That's why nervous speech often comes with self-interruptions, filler words, circular phrasing. It's not bad communication. It's the mind patching holes in real time. Some studies even show that people with higher anxiety levels unconsciously use verbal behavior, meaning gestures, tone shifts, or excessive speech, as a way to reduce internal arousal. It's the same mechanism as foot tapping or nail biting, just wrapped in sentences. It's movement through language. And interestingly, this pattern doesn't belong to just shy people. Extroverts do it too. They just hide it better. Because over-talking isn't about being social. It's about managing threat. The threat might not be real, but to the body, it feels exactly the same as standing on a cliff edge. So when someone says, "I don't know why I talk so much when I'm nervous," the answer is because their biology decided it was safer to keep going. It's not confidence. It's adrenaline trying to find an exit. And that's what makes it so human. They're not performing. They're protecting themselves. One sentence at a time. This pattern doesn't come from nowhere. Most people who talk too much when they're nervous didn't wake up one day and decide to be the talkative type. It's something they learned, slowly, over years, in the quiet spaces where silence used to feel like danger. Think back to childhood. Maybe silence in their house wasn't peaceful. It was the sound before a storm. The moment when a parent's mood shifted. The pause before criticism or the wait for something unpredictable. They learned that speaking first could soften the edge. That if you kept talking, you might keep the room calm. That words could fill the space before someone else filled it with something worse. Or maybe they grew up in an environment where being heard was a luxury. Louder voices always won. You had to compete for airtime, for attention, for affection. So you learned that talking, fast, often, vividly, was how you proved you existed, how you stayed visible, how you made sure people didn't forget you mid-sentence. And sometimes it wasn't about conflict at all. Sometimes it came from love, from parents who praised you only when you were charming, funny, articulate. So you learned that talking wasn't just communication. It was performance. It was how you earned warmth. And silence, even a small one, felt like the applause fading. Over time, those small lessons become habits stitched into the nervous system. The brain doesn't ask, "Is this the right moment to talk?" It just remembers. Silence equals risk. So as an adult, in meetings or dates or interviews, that old reflex wakes up again. It's automatic, like a survival script that never got rewritten. Sometimes it's even deeper. If you grew up being misunderstood, maybe with parents who dismissed your emotions or corrected how you spoke, then clarity becomes a form of safety. You over-explain because you've been trained to expect that people will twist your meaning. You talk more, hoping that precision will protect you. But of course, it never really does. And then there's the role of reinforcement. Every time that nervous flood of words worked, every time it diffused tension, got a laugh, or avoided awkward silence, your brain marked it as success. A little dopamine hit, a small relief. So the next time anxiety appeared, the same mechanism kicked in again. It's a loop of comfort disguised as communication. Most people grow out of childhood habits. This one just grows quieter, subtler, until life turns up the pressure again and the words come rushing back. A job interview, a date, a disagreement. The mouth moves before the mind can intervene. You start narrating your own nervousness, trying to sound composed, while your body is just trying to stay safe. And the strangest part? It's not even about the listener. It's about the echoes from years ago, the rooms where you first learned that silence wasn't safe, that presence had to be earned, and that talking was the only way to prove you were okay. So when someone overtalks today, it isn't a quirk of personality. It's the child inside them trying to keep peace in a room that no longer exists. For a long time, talking too much actually works. It really does. When anxiety hits, words are like stepping stones across a river that's suddenly turned violent. Each sentence buys a little ground. Each laugh, each story, each unnecessary detail becomes proof that you're still standing, still in control, still holding the room together. The flood of speech creates an illusion of safety. If you're the one guiding the rhythm, then no one else can turn it against you. In that moment, control feels like calm, and calm feels like acceptance. It's an incredibly clever system the mind builds for itself. Speech becomes armor. If you keep the sound going, the silence can't expose you. It's the same logic as leaving the lights on in a dark room so you don't see what's hiding in the corner. The brightness doesn't fix the fear. It just keeps it out of sight. Talking works the same way. It keeps the internal noise slightly quieter than the external one, and sometimes it even wins you affection. Nervous talkers can be charming. Their energy fills the gaps that others are too shy to bridge. They make conversation effortless for everyone else. People laugh, nod, respond. The talker gets the reward they were craving: connection. For a few shining minutes, they feel anchored, as if all that noise finally found a rhythm that makes sense. The body relaxes. The danger passes. Another little data point for the nervous system. See? It worked. Do that again next time. But that's the trap. What begins as self-soothing slowly becomes self-sabotage. Because the same behavior that protects you in one situation quietly isolates you in another. The more you rely on words to manage fear, the less you allow silence to hold you. Silence, though awkward, is where understanding happens. It's where others step forward, where shared presence builds. But when every second is filled, there's no space for reciprocity. No moment for someone else to join the rhythm. The talker stays in control, but control isn't connection. Over time, the consequences creep in quietly. Friends start to withdraw a little faster. Meetings end with polite smiles that don't reach the eyes. Dates feel like interviews. Afterward comes the self-replay, the late-night inventory of everything said and unsaid, the familiar hollow feeling of having performed instead of connected. The words did their job. They kept you safe. But they also built a wall so thin you can see through it, yet so dense you can't quite step beyond. What makes it so seductive is that the feedback loop feels good. Every time you talk through anxiety, you momentarily escape it. The brain learns that speech equals relief, but like any quick relief, it fades fast and leaves you emptier. The body gets addicted to the rhythm, to the illusion of movement, and the silence you're avoiding only grows heavier, waiting at the edge of every conversation like an unpaid debt. The hardest truth is that it's not a failure of willpower. It's an outdated survival reflex doing its best with old data. In childhood, that reflex probably kept you safe. In adulthood, it just keeps you busy. You talk and talk, thinking you're buying comfort, but what you're really doing is renting it. And the rent is due the moment the conversation ends. So yes, it works. It distracts the fear, softens the discomfort, keeps the world spinning smoothly for a few more minutes. But the cost sneaks in quietly. The exhaustion of being on all the time. The loneliness of realizing that you've been present in every conversation except your own. The strange thing about talking too much when you're nervous is that it gives the illusion of connection while quietly stealing the real thing. On the surface, it sounds social, animated, alive, full of stories. But underneath, there's a quiet absence. Conversations become monologues wearing the costume of dialogue. You speak, people listen, you fill the silence, they smile politely, and for a moment it almost feels like belonging. But when it's over, there's that familiar drop in your chest, the sense that you were heard, but not really seen. Over time, that pattern becomes heavy. You start to dread the very thing you're best at: conversation. You walk away from people feeling drained, embarrassed, like you've accidentally overshared your private static again. You promise yourself you'll be quieter next time, calmer, more controlled. But nerves don't care about promises. The moment anxiety returns, your reflex takes over, and the same loop begins. Protect, perform, regret. And it isn't just social exhaustion. It's identity erosion. Because every time you fill the air out of fear, you lose a little more of your authentic rhythm. The pauses, the moments of stillness, the tiny silences that allow intimacy to grow, they vanish. You start to sound like a version of yourself built for survival, not for sincerity. People sense it, even if they can't name it. They feel the disconnect, the subtle distance between what you're saying and what you're really feeling. In relationships, it can quietly erode closeness. Partners begin to feel like spectators in your internal storm. Friends stop volunteering stories because there's no space to tell them. You become the dependable talker, the one who keeps energy alive, keeps things moving. But no one realizes that underneath all the words, you're just trying to stop the world from going quiet long enough for your own fear to echo back. And that's the cost. Not just fatigue, not just embarrassment, but loneliness. A very specific kind of loneliness that comes from always being the voice in the room, never the silence that's shared. It's the loneliness of someone who keeps performing connection instead of resting inside it. The cruelest part is that the cure is the very thing that terrifies you most. Stillness. Silence. Breathing through the pause instead of running from it. But silence isn't judgment. It's space. It's what lets the other person step closer. It's what lets warmth replace performance. It's the proof that presence doesn't always have to be loud to be real. And maybe that's the quiet truth at the end of all this. People who talk too much when they're nervous aren't seeking attention. They're seeking permission. Permission to exist in a room without earning it. Permission to be heard without having to fill the silence. Permission to simply be there. Wordless, visible, and safe. Because when silence finally stops feeling dangerous, you don't need to keep explaining that you belong. You just do. Sometimes the bravest thing a nervous mind can do isn't to keep talking. It's to let a moment pass and trust that it won't disappear.